friend. Welcome to this beginner's F-Log guide tutorial video. I'm still working on that title, but I just want to say thank you before I get into the video. I have only been making YouTube videos for about a year now, and I just really appreciate all the support that I've been shown. Whether it's in all the free ways, sharing my videos, commenting, saying hello, or if it's in the ways that help me pay my bills, like buying a LUT or buying my online course. Thank you so much. I just really appreciate it because this has been a lot of fun making YouTube videos and I would like to make more. And so anyway, at the end of the video, I'm gonna release and show a new LUT I've made for F-Log. And if you would, go ahead and buy the LUT because it means a lot to me. It's helpful to support this channel as I grow. The more I can pay my bills, the more I can help other people in making these videos. And so off the top, just want to say thank you. We'll go ahead and start the video and get to the point. This is probably the third or the fourth time I've tried to make this video. And I think I just need to say out front that this can't be a comprehensive guide to log or even F-Log. I keep re-recording this video, again, probably 3 or 4 times because I keep seeing that there are things that I miss and I want to mention. And so you're probably going to notice that. I'm not going to be able to go over a ton of shots when I'm color grading because I don't want this video to become, an hour long or something like that. And so, yeah, this is not a comprehensive guide to F-Log, and I'm not an expert with log. I'm not an expert with color grading, or I'm not an expert DP. And so this is just going to be a beginner's guide to F-Log. And I really just want it to be helpful because there are a lot of videos out there about C-Log and V-Log and all of the others. And I just haven't seen that much attention be given to F-Log. And so I'm going to try and put together this practical guide that will take you through your menu settings, a few tips for actually shooting, especially with exposure and focus, and then we will color grade some. And I'm going to try and just do that quickly, but yeah, it's really hard to make this video. And so if you notice things missing, leave me a comment, ask a question. Let other people know what you notice, but just know that this is not comprehensive and it's not for experts. Over the last year, I've really started playing around with F-Log more and more. I love Classic Chrome. I still use Classic Chrome a lot, and at the end of the video, I'll tell you my kind of final conclusions, but I wanted to use F-Log because it gives you a bit better dynamic range and a bit more color flexibility in post. And that's one of the common reasons for shooting log footage, but I really wanted to try out F-Log, and it was a good learning experience for me. And so I'm just gonna go through a few tips right off the top here of things that I learned, and we'll touch on almost all of these when we're going through the settings, but if I don't mention them in the tips or the settings, I might mention some of these things when we're color grading, but let me tell you a few of the things that I learned right away. When shooting F-Log, it really helps to have a more robust file. So when you're shooting, you'll want to probably put your camera in 10-bit as opposed to 8-bit, and you'll probably want to shoot in 200 megabits per second or 400 instead of 100. And you can choose all I if you want the huge file size and if you're okay with losing out on 4K 60, but I think long-op does just fine. So we'll walk through that later, but those are some few notes because it's really nice to have the robust codec so that it doesn't start artifacting and banding when you're color grading. For exposure, the advice is kind of simple, and I'll show you a little bit of this when we're color grading. A lot of it's going to be practice, but make sure that you have your zebras, your histogram, and your exposure value turned on the side, the EV, the electronic exposure meter. So all 3 of those exposure tools are going to be useful for different reasons, but I'll show you a little bit more on that later. F-Log is not the best in low light scenarios. Now, Fuji has a great noise that looks like grain. And so it might fit your style like it fits mine, but you should probably test out F-Log in lower light scenarios before you just jump right into using it, because it might not be good enough for you in low light. Next is locking your white balance, whether it be with the presets of daylight, shade, or Kelvin, or if you use auto white balance lock like I do. Just make sure that you lock your white balance when you're shooting F-Log. It's really important because when you're going into post-production, you just want to have the best file that you can straight out of the camera so that it makes it easier on you later. F-Log is not the flattest profile out there when it comes to log, but it's definitely flatter than the film simulations. And so you'll want to make sure that you can monitor F-Log in a standard profile if possible. So if you can afford it, buy an external monitor or an external recorder, or on the X-T4, just turn on the screen display assist. I hope that comes to other cameras in future firmware updates maybe, but for the time being, only the X-T4 can monitor F-Log in the camera. You can use the other cameras and just use your display there, but it will look really flat and gray. And you might just need to practice more and get used to it if you can't afford an external monitor. And finally, when shooting F-Log, I recommend shooting in manual focus because autofocus loses a little bit of reliability due to the fact that you lose contrast in your image, and Fuji's autofocus is partly contrast based. And so I think manual focus is just going to be best, but I'll give you a few tips on that later. So that's pretty much it for the tips that I have. The only thing to remember is that none of these are rules. These are just tips. So I have shot F-Log in 8-bit at 100 megabits per second. I've shot F-Log in low light. I have shot F-Log, without a monitor before, and every time I'm able to make it work. So these are just tips. These are just best use case scenarios and ideas. So take those and let's go ahead and set up your camera to actually shoot. And then I'll give you a few tips to go out and practice, and then we'll color grade. So let's dive into the menu. Let's just go through pretty much every setting that we'll need. The first is the movie mode. I'm gonna shoot in 4K at 24 frames per second, 2398, and I'm gonna shoot at 200 megabits per second, 10-bit H.265. And movie compression is long GOP. If you choose all I, which I don't personally shoot, but if you choose that, you'll be stuck at 400 megabits per second and you won't have 4K 60. But you can choose all intra if you need it. So then let's keep going, and we'll want to make sure we turn on F-Log, of course. And as we keep going down, we want to turn on our zebras and turn the levels to 95%. You can play around with what levels work best for you, but I found 95 is great for me because then I know I'm almost completely blown out, but I've got a little bit of headroom left. And then if we keep going down, we get to white balance, and I have it set to auto because I will show you later how I have on the front of my camera white balance lock set up. And I set the sharpness to -2. I've tried -4 and I've tried 0. I find -2 is just somewhere nice in between. I can pull out sharpness in post or I can add it back in, but -2 is great. I like 0 for high ISO noise reduction. -4 is if you don't want any digital noise reduction at all. But I'm okay with a little bit. I found that it doesn't degrade the image too much, and it's probably helpful for me. And I don't use the inter-frame noise reduction because it disables 4K 60, and you can use that if you need to, but I don't. And then for the autofocus, I just leave it on manual, and I'll touch this in a different video about my focus settings, but then I turn on peaking and I turn them on red high, and that's all I do there. And the focus check, I make sure I have that on as well. And that's when I press in on this dial. It will do a focus check for me and it will zoom in. And the rest of this I don't use. I don't use the mic setting or the time code for F-Log. And then what I do use though is my buttons and my dials. I make sure that in here I have this button on the front here. You can see it's lit up. I use that for auto white balance lock. So that way before I start shooting, I can just press that button and have my white balance locked. But then auto white balance will do the work for me of making sure that it's just right. And then when you keep going down, I don't have the touch functions turned on, but one of them is assigned to my histogram. And I'll show you where I set that up later, but just make sure you do the auto white balance lock if you want to. And then in the screen setup, I make sure that I have turned on the F-Log View Assist. And again, this is only on the X-T4 currently, but I hope maybe it comes to other cameras in the future. And then otherwise in here, you can go and set other custom settings. And this is where you'll want to make sure you have your histogram on. So that's pretty much it. Okay, now that you have your camera's menus set up, now it's time to practice. Exposure and focus are going to be the two things I talk about real quick, but they're about 80% practice. 20% is the technical learning, but then you really just kind of need to go try it. And so on exposure, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that when you're exposing for F-Log, you want to make sure that you're always a little bit overexposed if you can. But with that, exposure isn't a hard and fast rule because it's about storytelling. And so you want it to fit the feel that you're going for, and that's about taste. But the technical side is that log prefers to be overexposed a little bit. And so if you can, try to get a little bit hotter on that EV on your histogram than you expect normally when shooting your film simulations. I use the EV for exposure, and I also use the zebras and the histogram like I showed you when you're setting up your settings. Because in different scenarios, you'll need different tools. For example, when I'm lighting this scene here, using my EV was really helpful because the scene is mostly well balanced. But the EV is also going to read this hotspot right here in my window. And so I also am going to be using my zebras. And so I brought up the zebras until they started clipping in this window here, but they weren't clipping me. And that's because I'm the subject here and I don't really mind losing this window. So that's a big tip for exposure, is to expose for your subject instead of exposing for the technical correctness. And you can use your EV, your histogram, and your zebras as a team to make sure that you're exposing that correctly. And I'll show you an example of that when we're color grading, but that's a big thing to remember. Don't try so hard to hold on to the rule of one stop overexposed for log that you end up poorly exposing for the subject in your frame. Now, after exposure, I would say focus is going to be really important for you. And that's because if you expose your shot well, but it's still out of focus or it's soft, it might not be usable. So focusing with F-Log is a bit more difficult, especially if you don't have an external monitor, but it's difficult because it's a bit flatter and it's a bit less saturated, and so you might have a harder time seeing or judging your focus. And Fuji, like I mentioned, is going to have a more difficult time autofocusing. So just practice manual focus, or use a little trick where you put your camera on single shot focus and lock your focus at the beginning, start recording, and switch it to manual focus, because then you can get focus peaking and still get the benefit of autofocus to start your shot. So that's just an idea that I have for you, but if you're going to use continuous autofocus, just make sure that you're not expecting it to be perfect. And now we're going to jump into some color grading. But before we do, I just need to make a few qualifications. The first is that I'm not a professional colorist. I love color grading, but I am by no means the final authority on color grading, or even the person to take advice from on how to do it technically perfect. And I'm going to be using DaVinci Resolve 16. If you're using Resolve 17, it should be pretty much the same, just minor differences. And if you're using a different program altogether, you should be able to take most of the things I'm showing you here and apply them. You'll just have to change some of the language and try out different tools to get the same look. So again, before we dive in, just know that this is not going to be a highly technical walkthrough. I'm just going to show you how I actually color grade a few different methods with my log footage. And this is footage that I have exposed well and that I like. So let's go ahead and we'll dive in now. All right, I've put together two little sequences here from weddings that I've shot on F-Log. And then I've got a few spare shots that we might get to. I'm gonna try and go pretty quick, but I'm just gonna start out by showing you the most simple way to grade F-Log footage. And that is by going to the Fujifilm website and downloading your camera's specific F-Log LUTs. So these are the F-Log LUTs right here. I've got all of them, but I only use the two that are the F-Log to wide dynamic range and the F-Log to Eterna. So I'll just show you the Eterna LUT here, and all I'm gonna do is on this node here, I'm just gonna paste the LUT by double clicking, and there you go. Right off the bat, I've got something that is usable, certainly is usable, and I think looks pretty good. But the sun is a little too hot, so I'm just gonna go into my log controls here, and I'm gonna bring that down so that I can control that roll off on the sun there. And I think this looks pretty good, but I think I want to pull my shadows down just a bit. And you can see that kind of expanded that range there too. So I'm gonna pull those down just a bit more here. And I think that looks really good. And then I'm gonna Option S, add a new node here. And I'm gonna go to my primaries. And my favorite way to modify the white balance, because this is almost a technically correct image, it's pretty good, but I would like it to be a little bit warmer and a little bit pinker, and a part of that is the visual style that I'm going for with this wedding. And I already finished it and delivered it, so you can go watch the final film, but I like it to be a little bit warmer and pinker because it was sunset and it was glowing. And this right here now with my waveform looks really good. Which, by the way, I always make sure I turn on my waveform here, and I don't use multiple. I don't expand it out or anything like that, and I really don't change anything in here. So yeah, just make sure you have on your waveform. And this looks really good to me. And then next, I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to click Option 1. And that saves this color grade as a memory function. So now I can click Command 1 and apply the same color grade here. And this looks pretty good right off the bat, but I can tell that the shadows are coming down a little too far. So I'm just gonna reset that. I'm gonna bring them back down just to where they're almost at the bottom. And then I'm gonna go to my second node here, because this is after the conversion takes place. So this, any changes I make are to the actual log footage. But this is now a Rec 709 color space that this node is working in. And so I'm gonna bring the gain up just a bit here. And I really like this. And I think I could, if I wanted, I could bring this one just a bit pinker so that the blending of these two shots works just a bit better. So now when you see these in a sequence, it makes a little bit more sense visually. And now on this shot, I'm going to show you the next method, which is the color space transform. So when I drop the color space transform on here, nothing happens. But then when I go here and I change this to Rec 2020, because F-Log is shot in Rec 2020, it's not a Rec 709 color space. And I change this to Fujifilm F-Log. And then this, I'm going to switch to Rec 709 and Rec 709. But you'll notice it's a little bit weird right now, this waveform here, and you can see it up in his head here and off to the side. It needs to be tone mapped. And so what that's doing, basically, I'm just kind of reading the Resolve manual here, but it just says that this has to be mapped to this gamma and color space. And so it's basically just doing a job where it translates this to this so that it's more precise. And there you go. Now you have something that's in a Rec 709 color space, and you can go ahead and work with this. You can apply my Fuji LUT here. So that's Rec 709. That's with my LUT on. And I think that looks great. But if you want to just make a one-click color grade, here I'll go back to that. You can see it a bit bigger. If you want to just do a one-click color grade, that's what my new Big Sur LUT is for. And you just click, and right there, instead of having to go through the transform, you can just have the LUT right there applied to your footage right away, and then go straight from here and style it if you want. Bring down the lift a little bit, maybe bring up the gain, and then I'm actually going to go to my log wheels here, and I'm going to bring down only the shadows. I don't want to affect too much of the image. And this looks really good, but I'm going to add a second node so I can do a bit more work. I'm going to bring down the highlights here, and then I'm going to make it just a bit warmer and pinker, and that looks good. So let's actually play this so that we can get a feel for what that's like in real time. I'm really happy with that. I think, yeah, that looks great to me. And I'm not just trusting my eye here, I'm relying on my waveform to tell me that this is a nice warm image because the red is just a bit hotter all around. You can see this is slightly red, and I really like this. So this is just pretty much with one click here using my Big Sur LUT. And then if we go on, let's try first, let's just show you what it looks like with just the Fuji wide dynamic range. It just gives you a nice safe image. It converts it to Rec 709 so that then you can go to work and do this to taste. You can just kind of stylize it how you want. And personally, I think, you know, that's looking fine. But this is where I just like to have a bit more style right off the bat, because I feel like it helps give me some direction in terms of color grading. And so my LUT comes in, gives you a little bit more color and just a little bit more contrast. And I'm going to lift the gain just a bit here, lift the gamma just a bit, and I'm going to go to the log wheels and just bring down only the shadows specifically. And then I'm going to add that new node here, and I'm going to do just a bit of warmth in the gamma. but you can tell it's still kind of green here. And since it was blue hour, it's maybe a little bit warm, or it's maybe a little bit bright. And so I'm going to bring that back down just a bit. And then I like this pink. I really want it to have kind of a pink glow because that's what it looked like there in person. And so it might look a little comical to you. It might look a little bit crazy, but this is what it actually felt like when we were there. It was just glowing pink. And so I think that looks really good there. I'm pretty happy with that. And then moving on, this is a completely different lighting scenario, but let's try and take Option 2 and then Command 2. That's just pasting the exact color grade from here to here. And it looks consistent, but the lighting did not look like this in person. It was nice and warm and soft, which this is going for, but this is a little too pink. So I'm going to reset that, and already I'm very happy with this. But it was actually a bit warmer than this because the sun was setting right over here, but it was cloud covered, so it was nice and soft. So I'm not going to push these highlights too much. You'll notice that in these other ones, I maybe push those highlights a little higher. But usually I like to stay near 896 because I just don't like to be, forcing that top of the boundary. The shadows, I'm a little more comfortable with playing it right down to the line or even crushing them a little bit. But with my highlights, I just like a bit more condensed image there, and so I just kind of go 896 as my rule of thumb. And this is how you get better at color grading without having, maybe your screen be the perfect screen. You just learn to rely on these tools here. So yeah, this is an image I'm really happy with. And then we'll move on, and now we're in a completely different lighting and scenario. We are going from the coast of California, where it's warm and golden, to the Pacific Northwest, where it is green and brown and dark. And we're just going to apply my LUT here again. Right away, I'm really happy with how this looks. If we let the footage play through just a bit, it's really fun. I love this moment. Honestly, there's not much I would do here except maybe just bring in a bit more warmth, just a touch. Like you can see here, what I'm doing is all I did was barely subtract some green and blue. I didn't even warm it up all that much. There's no more red, and that to me is really great. I could do more modifying. I'm sure I could pick and play at this image forever. I lost my highlights here, and if I wanted to bring those back, it looks like they're gone in camera. I just made the decision to blow those highlights, and I'm okay with that. I could possibly introduce a bit more contrast by bringing my black point down, but I like giving it some room to breathe since this whole frame is a bit darker. And so I like that right there. And since this was just one node, I'm just going to click Command Copy instead of Option. So I'm not saving that to memory. I'm just copying and pasting. And this is the same wooded area here. And so I'm just going to Command V to paste. And you can tell it's a little bit too hot. It's a little bit too bright. So the easiest adjustment that I can make here, let's just reset my log wheels and reset my primaries. The easiest adjustment for me to make is just by coming to my offset and bringing it down a bit, but that maybe brings it all down a bit too much. And I can tell you that specifically, I'm okay with this, the shadows walking down on this little area here, not too close to zero, but it's the gain, it's the highlights that I feel like are a little too hot. But if I bring down just the highlights, that looks good, but his jacket is just softening up. And so I want to bring it down a little bit more gently. And this is going to be pushing down on a whole area instead of just on the highlights, because that's the way the primaries wheels work. And that right there looks really good to me. I like having a little bit of the headroom there in the highlights, like I said. And if I want, I can bring down the lift just a touch, but I don't want to, because when I go back and forth, these levels actually match up pretty good. I really like how that looks. I might go just a bit greener here when I go towards the warm, and I'm going to go just a bit greener instead of, so I'm just barely going towards green and warm, because it just felt maybe a little pink before. But I'm okay with the pink look, but for the Pacific Northwest of the United States, it just fits to have it be a bit more green. And now, here we go. This is a great example where I'm going to talk about lighting. Clearly, Ashley, the bride, had a bright sunspot right on her face, and it was right on Adam's back here, and it's really great dynamic lighting. But if I had listened to my EV, it would have told me to bring the exposure up just a bit higher, because the background is so dark. But instead, I had to listen to my histogram and to my zebras set at 95, and I did my best to save her skin while monitoring the whole scene. So now let's go ahead and paste that grade, and you can see I haven't lost her skin. It's right on the edge. It's getting up there. So what I might do is just bring it back down just a bit more, to maybe like -15 or 0.15. But that looks pretty good to me. The whole thing though now does need a little bit more shadow, because I feel like it's just lacking a tiny bit of contrast. I would love for this background here to just have a bit more contrast. And so I'm actually gonna add a second node to do that, because you'll notice when I do it on the log node here, it's gonna push down a little too much of this. And I could do that adjustment with my shadow, but that's maybe too fine of an adjustment. So when I add this second node and I am in a Rec 709 space now, then I can just drop my lift a bit, and it doesn't push everything, it doesn't compress everything down. And so now with that, this is the difference that made. You see it just brought down the background just a bit. And I really like this, though the whole image is maybe just a bit hotter than I would like, so I'm going to bring it down again just a bit more here. And this is really great. I really like this. I'm happy with it. I could probably finesse and tweak little things forever, but we'll move on. But I'm going to save this to option 2, and I'm going to go back, and this was the previous shot, and I'm going to apply that grade to this here. But you can tell the difference right away, is that this is just a bit warmer and pinker, and this is just a bit greener. But I'm okay with that because there's a lot more landscape in this shot here. And so when you play them together, you don't really feel that difference all that much. And so I think that it looks good. I'm happy with this. Again, I could probably tweak and play with this forever, but I think they look good when you play them together, and we'll keep going. So this here, again, this is very different lighting than I was working with here, but let's go ahead and paste the command 2, and right away we can tell it's way too dark. So let's reset our primaries here, and now we can tell we actually do have a bit of breathing room, but that's just really compressed down there at the bottom. And so I'm going to reset all of this here. So all we have now is my LUT Big Sur series F-log LUT here. And let's see, I'm going to do a little lift here on my second node. And let's see first what it would look like on this node. I actually like this. It feels a bit smoother, though maybe it doesn't expand the shadows quite as much. I do like it a lot when I do it on the first node, the log node. And so let me go ahead and reset that. And I'll lift the gamma here. And I could also just lift my offset and get the whole thing into kind of a safer boundaried area. But I feel like when I lift the gamma, because I'm working with skin tones here, lifting the gamma specifically, I think is just a better strategy, and it's just worked better for me. But now that we've got that, now I'm gonna just drop my shadow just a touch, and that shadow here is just Ashley's hair, but yeah, that looks really good right away. And then I'm gonna let this play because you'll see the subject here is way too bright. It's not clipping, but it's just, I just want it a little bit darker. So I'm gonna bring it down just a bit. And then when I go back to the beginning, that looks pretty good. I could probably go just a bit warmer, and then maybe even bring the gamma down just a touch here. And let's play this. And again, I could tweak and play around with this for a long time, but I really like this. And I think we're almost done here. Let's go ahead and Command 2. And again, really dark here. You can tell before I, let's see, let's undo this. Before I apply anything, this was shot a bit darker. A lot of log clips like this one, let's see, yeah, will be up, you know, in the upper 2/3, you know, of your waveform here. But this one's kind of down in the middle, and I know for a fact when I shot this, this was at about 0 on my EV. So if I Command 2, it's a little bit dark and it's a little bit purple, but I think it's good. It mostly, I think, just needs some exposure adjustments. And so let's just make sure with our log image that we're in a safe place. I think it looks good right where it is. But if I go into my second node here and I bring the gain up just a bit and I bring the lift down just a touch, and now I'm gonna just go a touch greener, just because that pink tone is just a little aggressive here. So I'm just going a bit greener. And now if I let this play, I really like this. Skin tones look good. The green looks really natural. The white is pretty true white. Overall, super happy with that. And I probably shouldn't get to these, so let's just go ahead and call it there. So that's all that I have for you in this F-log guide video. I hope that you found it helpful in some way. F-log has been a really fun learning experience for me, but I'm probably gonna keep using it like any other tool for filmmaking, and I'm probably not gonna use it every single time I pull out my camera. I love the classic chrome that I've really adjusted and fine-tuned to my liking, and it works for me in almost every scenario, though there are a few times where I'll probably start using log. And that's really helpful. It's a great tool to have in the toolkit. And so if you're gonna be using log, I would love if you would consider buying my LUT. If not, that's okay. I appreciate you watching this video and making it this far. Leave me a comment, say hello. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you again for all the support in this last year on YouTube. It's been a lot of fun. I would love to help you out specifically, so leave me a video idea down below and say hello. And with that, peace.